Hi, this is DC O'Rourke, paranormal investigator and host of Hauntingly Yours, a podcast for the paranormal, and you are listening to Ghost in the Valley podcast.
Welcome to Ghost in the Valley podcast. I'm your host, Al Cooley. Today I have part 3 of Dave Hodrien's Birmingham's UFO Group out of Birmingham, England. And he was generous enough to give me a couple more episodes for bonus. So today is the final 3-part series. I'll be right back with my interview with Dave Hodrien. Here is a promo for the UFO card game UFO Wave by Dave Hodrien that will be out soon on Amazon.co.uk with plans for international orders in due course.
Are you receiving me?
Yes, Commander. Loud and clear. What are your orders?
I need you to get out there and cause some mischief. But watch out. As always, the humans will be there to stop you. Their military patrols the skies. They watch us from the ground. And the less said about those pesky men in black, the better. You were authorized to use our highly advanced craft to accomplish your goals. And don't forget to make the most of our abilities, too. The humans won't know what hit them. UFO Wave, the tactical card game of alien supremacy.
The UFO Wave card game will be available Amazon.co.uk. This episode is brought to you by Podcash, a collaboration between Racket and Stir. Podcash is free cash for your podcast. Podcash gave away $100,000 to up-and-coming podcasters as a way to support insanely creative and inspiring podcasters. I ought to know because I'm one of those podcasters that received a winning cash sum. I know how difficult it can be to get a podcast off the ground, and this is why I'm so excited to have been a podcast winner. I would have gone nuts for something like this when I was first starting out. If podcasting has been on your to-do list or you're already a podcaster, go to podcash.com to stay up to date with future podcast happenings. That's podcash.com. And I thank all who voted for me and made me a podcast winner. That's podcash.com. I am Al Cooley from Ghosts in the Valley podcast. Okay, welcome back, Dave.
Thank you.
I'm going to add this like to the bonus feature because you have 2 really interesting stories to share.
Yes.
I wanted to do this separate because it sounds like they're really, really interesting.
They're very, very good cases.
Of course, they're all good cases.
Yeah. So we're going to move away from contacts now, and we're going to look at 2 absolutely fascinating experiences. Both of them are quite new. And the first one, believe it or not, involves what I believe is a genuine UFO crash, a UFO crash case that until recently was not known about by anybody. And I'll take you through exactly what happened with this.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
The case involves a gentleman named Adrian Johns. He's an ex-farmer from Devon in the south of England. And he contacted me in September 2021 to report something absolutely fascinating that took place between Christmas and New Year in 1996 on a cattle ranch in an area known as Corralito in Venezuela. Adrian used to live in the UK, but in 1976, he moved out to work as a ranch farmer in Venezuela. Now, the reason for this was there was a crash at the time in the farmers market, everybody was finding it very, very difficult. And he looked around. He used to get this regular Farmers Weekly magazine, and he found an ad in that. And essentially, the ad was a job position going on a cattle ranch in Venezuela. And he decided he didn't have too much ties at the time, and he decided to do it. He decided to move out there in 1976, and he lived there for quite a period of time. And by 1996, he'd become the administrator of a large cattle ranch, and he sent me a screen grab of his official ID to prove that position. Mm-hmm. So he was out at this cattle ranch. He also sent the numerous photographs of the ranch, and it's essentially a mix of open grassland and very, very dense jungle. So very, very dense jungle vegetation, and it's the sort of place where you can get panthers and pythons and all sorts of wild beasties. And as I said, this took place between Christmas and New Year of 1996, by which point he was the administrator of this ranch. Most of the ranch hands had gone home for the Christmas holidays. But on the ranch remained Adrian, his two stepbrothers, and a number of other cowboys. The HQ for the ranch is still there today. You can find it on maps. Is at the centre of this massive open area. And every evening they drive to the northwest corner of the ranch to lock the main gate. And Adrian said that this is quite a dangerous location to work in. There's things like kidnappings and that sort of thing go on. So it was always very important to securitize the ranch at night time. So they drive out to this every single evening. So they drove out, and it took about half an hour to reach. So they set off about sort of 6 o'clock. And they drove out there in a pickup truck where there's two stepbrothers and several other cowboys on the back seat. The route across the ranch land took them past their own personal airstrip, which was closed for the holidays. So it wasn't like a full airport or anything. It was just basically a landing strip for planes to come in, with supplies, etc. They arrived at the gate about 6:30, and at the gate there was a gate guard. And as it was the Christmas holidays, they stayed there for a bit with him, having a coffee and a chat. And about 7 p.m. they decided to make the move back to the headquarters of the ranch. By this point, because of the time of year, most light had faded in the sky. It was almost getting to dark. As they approached the landing strip, so it's now, I'd say, about 7:20 or something like that. They're approaching the landing strip, and all of a sudden, off to the left, at the front of the pickup truck, they see something amazing. What they saw was a glowing yellow cigar-shaped object. It appeared to have no wings or tail, brightly glowing a bright yellow. There was at least one round white window visible in the thing around the kind of center of it. It seemed to be only about 50 feet off the ground, and it was also moving very slowly. Adrian estimates it was flying at about 20 miles an hour, which coincidentally is too slow for an aircraft to fly at without dropping out of the sky. They immediately stop the vehicle and get out of the pickup truck, amazed at this thing. And it essentially flies on a straight path right in front of them. As it flies silently across in front of them, and it's passing across the front of the airstrip ahead of them, about 100 yards ahead of them, all of a sudden it bursts into flames. But it doesn't come down. It continues flying. It continues flying on a straight course without descending or turning direction at all. But now there's flames billowing across the surface of this thing, and it continues to the west towards an area of a thick jungle known as La Mata. Dense jungle near the outer edge of the ranch. And they're watching this amazed, and they're watching it head away. None of them got cameras, by the way. This was back in 1996, and they weren't ready to take photographs of anything. So it's flying away into the distance, and all of a sudden it silently breaks up into numerous chunks that then rain down into the trees below. The chunks were still on fire as they fell down. Now, unfortunately, they couldn't drive to the location where these chunks had seemingly come down. It was very, very thick vegetation growing due to that time of year. They have kind of monsoon seasons, and he said that the vegetation growth very, very thick, and there was no roads that led out to that area of jungle, so they couldn't actually get out there to where these pieces had come down. So all they could do is go back to the headquarters and they then remained there for a number of hours discussing what they'd seen. This wasn't the end of the story. The following day, they're still discussing it in conversation because obviously it was quite a wild thing that all six of them saw. They had the radio on. They just used to put the radio on just in the day in the headquarters, and a news report came on saying that an aircraft near to San Fernando de Apure, which is a town to the southeast of where the ranch land is, the previous day it had to make an emergency landing after witnessing a glowing object that was traveling on a northward path that had gone quite close to the plane, essentially, and spooked the pilots out, and they made this emergency landing. So they had that report come in of that. Now, it still wasn't the end of the story, because about a week later, the other ranch staff returned from their holidays. So it was kind of early January now. And obviously, Adrian and the others who'd been there told them about what happened. Well, some of the villagers lived in a small village called Gartatinajajjas. I think I've said it right. It's quite difficult to pronounce. It's a small village to the east of where the ranch is. And numerous people who lived in that village said that on that same day when they had that sighting, they said they'd seen a glowing object that approached from the south, made a right-angle turn over the village, and then headed off to the west, which coincidentally was the direction that the ranch was in. Looking at all that, I know we've got 3 separate incidents there, but it seems pretty likely that they're all the same object.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to track the actual suspected route that this object would have taken. So it's kind of coming up from the south of Apure, going northwards, close miss with the plane, carries on until it reaches the Gartatinajajjas, then takes a right-angle turn, and then it's heading west, which leads to where the airstrip is on the ranch land. So it seems very likely that this was the object seen by numerous individual people. Absolutely fascinating. Obviously, it's a big claim to make. Yeah, it's a UFO crash. Very, very big claim to make, and I don't make it lightly. Yeah, so obviously, I was looking into what it could potentially be instead of that. Right. Okay. So let's have a look at some ideas. Right. Well, I don't think it was an aircraft reflecting sunlight. You have to remember that sometimes, obviously, distant aircraft. This thing wasn't distant for a start, but distant aircraft can sometimes reflect sunlight. We've all seen it before on a bright sunny day, and they reflect the sunlight, and you can't see the wings. It's like a long glowing stick in the sky, essentially. But you have to remember that the staff that saw this, they were used to seeing aircraft in all sorts of different lighting conditions and weather, because they own the airstrip. Yeah, so so it wasn't a plane. They knew it wasn't a plane. It had no wings on it. It said it was 100 yards away. It was flying much too low for a plane. It was completely silent, and it was flying at too slow a speed for a plane. The sun had nearly vanished in the sky. So you think, speaking with Adrian in depth about this, he said that there was nowhere near enough sun in the sky for it to have reflected off it that brightly. When it went away, and it did break up in the parts, even though it seemed to be a good mile away at least when it did that, it's very likely you would still hear some kind of explosion when that happened. So I don't think it was an aircraft. Oh, and lastly, there was no aircraft reported missing in the area. So Adrian said if there had been an aircraft come down, then he would have almost certainly heard reports of it on the radio, or even somebody may have even come out to the ranch and said that, there's been a plane crash in the area, and he heard nothing about that at all.
Well, at least it didn't say it was a weather balloon.
Well, that's one of the next things I wanted to look at, because I was thinking, could this have been some kind of blimp? Yeah. So blimps they can be quite large in size. They can look cylindrical with rounded ends, or a tic tac, if you will.
Right.
Okay. But blimps do not have round windows along them. Nor and there was no tail fins seen on this thing. But more primarily, if a blimp caught fire and exploded, I assure you that they would have been able to hear the sound a lot further away than where this thing blew up.
You said the chunks came down when it kind of blew up. They never found any of those chunks?
Well,
no evidence.
What happened was I forgot to mention that, didn't I? A number of months later, he said once the vegetation had dried out, and it had started to clear, he said some points of the year you can't actually go out there. So one day he decided to drive out just himself. He told the other ranch hands where he was going, and he headed out there and he looked around, but he said that he couldn't find it, and he thinks that the chunks might be there, but because of the vegetation overgrowth, there was loads of vines and things that had just grown over. So he thinks that in the months between it, in the weeks between it going down, and there was vegetation growth. So he said that he couldn't find anything. He did try one afternoon looking to see if he could find the chunks. So what we've got is the chunks could still be there right now in the jungle out there in Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, back to these explanations. Yes, I don't think it was a blimp yet, because the sound of a blimp exploding would surely be able to be heard from where they were.
Oh yeah, exactly.
And then the other explanation that I was thinking maybe it could have been is a meteorite. But so you remember a number of years ago we had the meteorite that was seen over Russia, and there was those spectacular videos of it flying across the sky. Yeah.
Yeah, but meteor's not going to go that slow, though.
No, exactly. Yeah. So a meteorite will cross the sky in a number of seconds, even at altitude. It seemed to be a lot closer than that, and I know that distance can be deceiving, but again, I go back to the fact that these guys own their own airstrip. It was moving much too slowly. It was much too low down. It was moving on a straight course, and primarily there was no trail behind it at all. Meteorites do not fly along without being on fire, and then all of a sudden they're on fire. They're always on fire.
Exactly.
From the first point you see them. That's why they're glowing in the first place.
Nor do they change course.
Well, exactly, yeah. So in looking at this course, so there is actually some hills to the east of the ranch here, and this is one of the logic that Adrian and myself come up with for it potentially being under intelligent control. Adrian said that at that height, it would have crashed into those hills unless it had maneuvered between them before they caught an eye on it. So when they saw it, it was the edge of the airstrip area, which is a nice flattened, opened area, of course, for the planes to land. Yeah, but he said that before it had got to that, if it was at that height, it had either descended from a higher altitude and come down over the top of the hills and then come down low for whatever reason. And it might have also gone up because in the area of La Mata, again, there's some low hills. So he thinks it was following the landscape, essentially. So, it didn't crash into the ground. It was ascending, which, again, I know it doesn't really show intelligence, but certainly if it had maneuvered between them, it would have showed intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
But looking at all these explanations, none of them really fit, and I've wrapped my brains to think of any mundane explanation that could potentially explain this, and there genuinely isn't one from the details that Adrian's provided. And yes, I admit it's just his testimonial evidence. I did try getting a chat with one of his stepbrothers. One of his stepbrothers, he unfortunately no longer speaks with at all. The other one, I wanted to speak with him, but he reached out to him, but he didn't want to get involved, and that's because he apparently got quite a prominent position, and he was worried about any ridicule. I did tell him it was going to be completely anonymous, but obviously because I've mentioned Adrian's name in the report, coincidentally people could then work out who he was as his stepbrother.
Right.
So I can understand that. I tell I'm totally fine with that. The other cowboys that were there at the time, he's lost touch with. He moved back to the UK about a year after this experience, not because of the experience or anything. He just decided to move back, and he's no longer working as a farmer, but he's living back in Devon again. But yeah, it's an absolutely fascinating case, and I believe a genuine UFO crash. And who knows? Yeah, the bits of it might be out there right now. Isn't that wild?
Yeah, those are my most fascinating. Are the crashes,
Yeah.
And then usually, if there is a crash, there's a cover up. That's what I've been seeing.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, obviously it was over by the edge of the ranch, so let's say some sort of military had gone in there afterwards and cleared it up. We wouldn't know. He never saw any signs of that taking place.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Also, maybe because of where it come down, there was no other witnesses to it other than the people that had already seen it.
Yeah, when you said it was traveling, kind of slower speed, and first thing I thought of, was a meteor. Because
Yes.
if you saw it started breaking up in chunks, and because a meteor do that as it's breaking up in the atmosphere, but
Absolutely, yeah.
it's one direction. They don't change speed or course.
He's done some very, very good drawings of what they saw, and it doesn't look anything like a meteorite. And a meteorite would have a tail, so there's no tail behind this thing. It was essentially a glowing, bright yellow Tic Tac looking thing that then all of a sudden had flames over it. Even though when they first saw it, there was no flames. So it actually caught fire while they were looking at it.
I'm going to take a short break and come back with one more bonus case that Dave Hodrien would like to share with us. But before I do that, at the bottom of this episode, I'll have all of Dave's links. There will be a link down there for a game that Dave just finished creating. It's called UFO Wave. It's a card game that the whole family can play, and I will put the links to that game at the bottom of this episode. I'll be right back with the last bonus case by Dave Hodrien from the Birmingham UFO Group out of Birmingham, England. Here is a promo for the UFO card game UFO Wave, by Dave Hodrien that will be out soon on Amazon.co.uk, with plans for international orders in due course.
Are you receiving me?
Yes, Commander. Loud and clear. What are your orders?
I need you to get out there and cause some mischief. But watch out. As always, the humans will be there to stop you. Their military patrols the skies. They watch us from the ground. And the less said about those pesky men in black, the better. You are authorized to use our highly advanced craft to accomplish your goals. And don't forget to make the most of our abilities, too. The humans won't know what hit them. UFO Wave, the tactical card game of alien supremacy.
The UFO Wave card game will be available Amazon.co.uk.
Hiya! Hey guys, welcome to the Tokyo Munchies podcast. We talk about Japanese candies, snacks, chocolate. We talk about the Tokyo weather, the Japan news, walking in my garden with Kyle while sitting in the pool. Also, we talk about 10 Sucker Sports, JapanRamenBox.com, and Skateboarding Japan. Drop by, check out our podcast. And as always, this is Kyle from Tokyo Munchies. Hiya! Come and get some.
Well, the last case you want to talk about was the Greek Air Force.
Yes, yeah. No, this is very, very interesting indeed. This is, I think, the only case I've ever investigated in the last 15 years, which is genuinely classified, and classified to this day. So it's quite serious for that reason. I was contacted by a gentleman in April 2021. Obviously, I'm not going to release his name. He was an ex-aircraft mechanic who worked for the Greek Air Force. Now, obviously, I'm not just going to accept that. He needed to provide me evidence that he was who he said he was, and he willingly did that. He provided me a number of photographs of him actually on the airbase, which he's allowed me to include in the case report with his face blacked out.
You have to be very trusting on your part,
Yes, it took me a while to gain his trust, because at first he was very cautious about wanting to speak to me at all. He also provided for me, and only me, photographs of his uniform with his name on. He didn't want those going out in the report, even modified. He was more cautious about those. So they were just essentially to prove his background. And on his request, I haven't included them in the report. But he certainly is who he says he is. The incident took place in July 1989. And at this point, he was stationed at a large East Coast air base in Greece. Again, he doesn't want me to release the name of that base. If you looked on a map, you could probably find it. He was part of a squadron of 12 at that time. The squadron was made up of himself, 3 other aircraft mechanics, 4 pilots, and 4 weapons experts. On the night this took place, he doesn't know the exact date, just some point in July 1989. They were stationed at the west end of the main runway of this base. And what they were doing is they were on alert for a potential training exercise. So a lot of the time, there's nothing goes on. Obviously, they're not constantly getting attacked by foreign powers or anything, but they do regular training exercises for what to do in the event of an attack. So they were on standby in case they decided to do this training exercise while his squadron was active, essentially, and they would have to jump into action, and the pilots would have to get airborne, etc. So it's 12:40 in the morning. And the aircraft mechanics do a shift change every couple of hours, so they'd change throughout the night. And it's 12:40 a.m. and there's a shift change. And at this point, he's inside the building where him and his squadron were basically hanging out. He said that there wasn't much in there, just tables and chairs. It was quite boring, and they'd just sit there chatting most of the night. And he stepped outside to stretch his legs. It was a very warm night. It was still, and it was also clear. So the stars, a lovely view of the stars ahead. And he looks to the east along the main runway. He happens to notice 3 red lights hovering over the center of the runway. They're in a triangular formation. Now, again, this has massive echoes back to the Erdington case that I discussed in part 1. It's pretty much looked identical. It appeared to be about 500 meters away from his position, and he says it was about 300 to 500 meters up. Now, as an aircraft mechanic who worked on an airbase, I trust his judgment on heights of things a lot better than I would a normal civilian, of course, because he's used to seeing aircraft. So that's probably a pretty accurate representation of where it was. He couldn't see the main body of the object. It was just, but it just had these lights. But it certainly gave the impression that it was a single object with these three lights in the base. And he said if it was a single object, it would have been about 100 feet across. He thinks 100 to 115 feet across.
Mm-hmm. Seems about average of people that have to describe these things, around 100 feet or 100 yards.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, sometimes they're massive, aren't they? I mean, there's some cases where they've reported them being massive, like several football pitches in size.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, most of the time they seem to be this, and then they can go.
That's a big size, 100 feet. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty big, pretty sizable. He calls out a squadron to have a look at this thing, and all 12 of them are then standing there, staring, looking at these lights, puzzled. They haven't got a camera on them while they're on shift. They watch these lights for 10 minutes. And they're completely motionless and silent. And then, without warning, the lights go. They shoot away like a bullet to the east. And he said it was gone in a couple of seconds to the horizon. So they all watched it go and perform that incredible maneuver from a standing stop with no sound at all.
No human can survive that.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, the maneuvering capabilities of that are far in advance of anything that we've got, and very likely to be far in advance of anything we've got, including black projects that we don't yet know about. So it shoots away over the scene. It's just gone. And at this point, he expects the alarms to go off because they expect that the base would have detected this strange object and treated it as some kind of threat, and expected all the alarms to go off and then to get jets in the air and everything else. There's nothing. Silence. Nothing comes in. So they're really puzzled by that. So they go back inside the building and they're sitting there talking about it, and they actually complete their shift. Their shift ends about 6 a.m. and then another squadron would then take over, and they all go back to their barracks and go off to sleep. Following day, so the following afternoon now, they wake back up again, and him and his squadron are called into the office of their commanding officer they don't tell them why, they're just told to report there. And when they go to the office, they were told that they were aware they'd seen something the previous night. And then what they said is that they'd been testing air defenses, and they said that they'd seen something similar to an AWACS aircraft, that's an airborne warning and control system aircraft. For those who don't know, that's one of the planes with the large kind of flattened round disc on the top. It's as a radar attachment to the top of the aircraft. Obviously, that's absolutely nothing like what they saw, and the squadron were fully aware of that fact. The AWACS aircraft continuously move. They're essentially normal aircraft. They can't stop still. They can't hover motionless, and they definitely can't shoot away like a bullet from a standing stop. So they knew it wasn't that at all. But they also knew that they were being told that's what it was, and that they had to accept that. They were then told that it was classified, and they weren't allowed to talk about it to anybody, including their own families.
Is it still classified?
Yeah, which is why he was very, very concerned about telling me, because he was worried for his own everything. He was worried about it coming back on him. He was friends with numerous radar operators on the base at the time, and he apparently later on learned that the object had not been picked up on radar. So he believes it was actively jamming radar. In speaking with him and the background he provided in the details, I'm absolutely convinced that it's a real case and still classified to this day. So it was really fascinating speaking, because a lot of my cases involve civilians. I speak with anybody about anything. People seeing a light on, in the distance or whatever. But these big cases that come my way from time to time are truly fascinating. And I've dealt with several other military cases. There's actually a case I dealt with in Germany, again with somebody on active service, who I believe is probably still on active service, who actually woke up in his barracks with a reptilian being standing alongside his bed. So he had a visitation experience on the base.
That had to be an experience, yeah.
Yeah, which terrified him, and he was actually searching all around the room trying to find it, looking under the bed and in cupboards and things. But yeah, aside, so yeah, cases do occur, of course, on military bases, because why wouldn't they? They're occurring everywhere, and occasionally these incidents do come my way, and it was really fascinating speaking with him. And if he listens to this at any point, I hope I've done his sighting honours. and treated it with the seriousness it deserves.
Quite a few people is going to, can relate to a lot of these stories.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Because it's everywhere,
Yeah, and the patterns are there. I mean, you've seen the patterns of these cases I've gone over in the 2 interviews. You can see all these little details that fit. These cases are completely separate individuals, with completely different backgrounds. Some of them had no interest in the UFO subject at all, or really didn't even know what contact was and in depth until they'd spoken with myself about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the evidence for the reality of this comes from. Some people are skeptical towards all this. Will sort of say, "Oh, their brains are being polluted by stuff they've watched on TV and that." But you have to be realistic. Yes, people may have seen. I mean, they're everywhere, aren't they? People may have seen greys. I mean, they're on breakfast cereals, for bags of crisps and everything else. Yeah, and people may have seen a classic flying saucer before. I'm not saying that they haven't. But saying that, I've dealt with cases involving children, as young as 5 years old, who, I'm pretty sure their parents wouldn't have shown them Close Encounters of the Third Kind or whatever, so, and yet they're reporting the same beings.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's numerous other possibilities for what's going on there. I'm not saying that that's clean cut.
First Encounters of the Third Kind happened a county over from me. That's what the movie is taken from. Mm-hmm.
I watched that film again recently with my daughter, because my daughter's got to an age where she can start to appreciate.
Well, that's just gets me, it's whether it be UK, Venezuela, Greece, it's US, it's everywhere, So when when you're talking about, they move very slow, the craft, and then they are gone from point A to point B in less than 2 seconds, so 80,000 miles an hour, whatever.
Yeah.
And that's everywhere. I mean, and they don't make a sound.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, there's no way for just that one case there. Okay, that involves a genuine military witness who provided genuine evidence that proved he was who he said he was. Yeah, I've got no reason to doubt his story and to doubt that took out. And why on earth would he be telling me that if he's genuinely worried?
Yeah, and the pictures I've got with the implants, from everywhere. So
yes.
It is fascinating.
There's a reality to this subject that the majority of the public, even today, choose to actively ignore. I don't think it's not about having the interest to go looking for the cases. I think that there's a lot of people out there who just fence sit regarding the subject. They don't really care whether it's real or not. They're just going about their daily lives, and everybody's busy and everybody's got a lot going on in their lives. And unless it affects them directly, like unless they've had their own experience, then it really doesn't matter to them that enough to care whether it's genuinely real or not. But I say anybody who looks into this in detail cannot fail to come away impressed at the evidence on record, or they're kidding themselves.
Right. I mean, you just can't ignore it,
There's people out there who just want it to be mundane. They want it to be explained in a mundane way. So they'll push a mundane explanation no matter how much evidence there is to the contrary.
Right, they want to see an exact gray alien actually putting that implant under the skin, and it's not going to happen.
Even let's say full disclosure happened, and our governments came clean with all this, and they presented to everybody a live alien on stage next to them, whatever. A lot of people watching the footage of that would think it was CGI. A lot of people who were there would probably think it was somebody in a costume. They still wouldn't be able to gather the reality of it,
right?
Even in that situation.
Any type of equipment that's out there with you. To me, being there and being pushed or feeling what you feel, you can't explain it to somebody.
It's happened, and how do you prove it? How do you prove after the
fact?
Right. Prove it? Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's the thing, and it's harder to do that with the UFO thing than it's the paranormal subject. I find fascinating. I mean, I've got an interest in all that as well. I've got genuine interest in.
Well, like I said, it doesn't matter if it's UFO, if it's Bigfoot, or if it's ghost, unless you experience it,
absolutely,
or actually know the person, or you trust that person's opinion.
There's just too many stories. There's
too many. Yeah, right.
But most people will know at least one person that will have either had an experience themselves that they can't explain, or they'll know somebody who has. Numerous people who have, and I think the evidence is astronomically big for the reality of it.
Well, Dave, I really do appreciate you spending your time with me. I know it's late over there right now.
No problem at all.
And that we just scratched the surface really in all these cases. And there's so many more that you've been involved with. But I will put your links to the bottom of this of the both episodes, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Of course, Al. Yeah, happy to chat anytime. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave Hodrien, for that fantastic interview. Thank you for the bonus episode. Dave has had tons of UFO experience investigating so many sites through the BUFOG organization. If you get a chance, go to the bottom of this episode and check out all of Dave's links, the link to his board game he has out, a UFO card game that the whole family can enjoy. That link as well will be at the bottom of this episode. I'll see you in 2 weeks with another great episode on Ghost in the Valley podcast.